Coach Kim, now we're going to discuss about lane play for tournaments, which is going to be kind of a little bit different than what you normally see in the house conditions.
Right. Usually, you know, the patterns that they use in tournaments are much more difficult than the house patterns. They're flatter, so you don't have a defined area to play.
Yeah, so you don't have that really a lot of oil in the middle and really dry on the outside like you have in your normal house condition. Tournament conditions, they're going to be a ratio of like 3 to 1, which means there's 3 times more oil in the middle than there is on the outside. While house conditions, there could be almost 10 to 15 times more oil in the middle than on the outside.
Right. So in house patterns, if you happen to miss right, lane helps you bring the ball back to the pocket. If you miss inside, the buildup of oil in the middle of the lane helps it kind of stay on line and still pretty much get to the pocket.
So when you start bowling tournaments, you kind of run into, I want to play them like my house, or it's a little bit different, and the moves are completely different where you want to play the lanes on tournament type conditions as opposed to house conditions.
Right. You want to, you know, I mean, the first thing that we really want to find out in tournaments is what's the distance of the pattern.
So how long the pattern is, and what will that help us? Will it tell us where to play?
Yeah, distance tells you where to play. So if we have, let's just say a 35-foot pattern, we want to subtract 31 from that distance, and it tells us right around where we want to have our break point.
So there's a rule that we have in tournaments called the rule of 31.
Exactly.
Subtract 31 from the distance of the oil pattern. Gives us kind of an area where we want the ball to be when it comes out of that oil pattern, or sometimes referred to as the break point. So our first cone down here, we have it on the foreboard, which is going to be where you probably want the ball to be, general area, when you're playing a 35-foot pattern.
Right. And how you get there through the front part of the lane is going to be a little bit dependent on what you're able to do, what your roll looks like, how you roll the ball. But ideally, we want to be pretty direct.
Because, yeah, if we're hooking at it, let's say that we're crossing a lot of boards, coming to that point, it's going to fall off into the channel very, very quick. So
Right.
this one you have to be very direct at.
Right.
Next one we have here is a 39-foot pattern. So we take 39 feet, subtract 31, what do we have?
We get to 8.
So we're right here, and we're at 8 board at 39 feet. So this one gives us a little bit more room to attack. We can come directly at it or slightly head belly or launch the ball from left to right out to this point. So that gives a little bit more room. It's kind of similar to the distance you see in a house pattern.
Right. I was just going to say that. This is really pretty common distance-wise to pretty much any house pattern across the country. Right around second arrows where they encourage you to play and where you'll be able to get the ball to the pocket from.
And here behind us we have one that's going to be at 47 feet. This is one of the longest patterns that we'll see in international competition and tournament play. You take 47, subtract 31, what do we have?
We have 16, and this is a pattern that you want to play, again, pretty direct. You don't want to cross too many boards, and you know the idea is because we're so close to the pocket and we're so close to the pins that you really don't want to have your ball, when it comes out of the pattern, too far away from it. This is, you know, pretty much setting it up right in front of the pocket.
So we don't want to be coming off the corner at this angle, because if we miss a little bit, we're going left. It's a little right, we're missing the head pin. This one we still want to be fairly direct coming to this point. A lot of times we see players on these longer patterns want to play it off the corner, which is, you're not giving yourself room for error. So let's discuss in a little more detail about how to play the short pattern. We have a 35-foot pattern, and we talked about the rule of 31. We have this cone down here just past 35 feet on foreboard. So we want to play to foreboard at just past 35 feet. What do we have here? We have the balls showing the angle that we want to be doing down the lane.
All right, this is pretty much illustrating how, regardless of your rev rate, the way we want to play the short pattern, you want to go as direct as you can. And again, have your break point as far away from the pocket to accommodate all this hook that we have between the pattern ending and actually hitting the pin.
So this is probably the most defined of all the type of pattern distance. Short patterns really dictate be playing out and very close to the channel or the gutter all the way.
Right, and so often, you know, as they start to transition and the lanes change, you know, our instinct is to move left, because in all house patterns we're going to find more oil to the left, but with these flatter patterns we're just going to find just as much hook. So we want to stay right, and you almost end up, very often you're going to move right.
Maybe actually a little closer to the gutter as the lanes transit, or finding a way to throw it faster or to loft it, somewhere to keep it on this line, where a lot of players get in trouble as the lanes transition as they get out of this zone. And the short pattern really defined, this is the zone where you want to play the lanes. Brian, being a high rev player, chose to use urethane on the shorter pattern. A lot of the higher rev players are throwing older urethane because it doesn't change direction as much down lane. It's more controllable. What we see a lot of times with players is they play way too far left on the short oil patterns because they see all that hook down lane, and you get such over and under on the back end that one ball will go light, next one goes high. You have very little room for error. Now we're going to discuss how we would play a medium pattern. We have a 39-foot pattern. We're subtracting 31 from that. It's going to give us 8. So down the lane, we want the ball to be exiting our break point about 8 boards. So there's different ways you can attack this. How would you play, Coach?
Well, depending on your rev rate and if you're a straighter player versus one that hooks the ball a little bit more, I mean, we could still use the orange line to get us there pretty direct. Or if you have a higher rev rate, you step left a little bit. You know, this offers so many different angles, which is why I think the medium patterns sometimes are a little trickier than both the short and the long, because you can hit it so many different ways.
So it's not defined where you actually want to play it, so people can play more area, different areas or different zones, so the transitions can become very, very tricky as you start playing more of the medium patterns. But I guess a player that has higher speed or lower revs or more direct is going to go pretty much up that second arrow coming down to this break point. Whereas a hook player can be crossing somewhere between third and fourth arrow and playing, actually they're playing the lanes the same, they just have different launch angles to the front.
Right, I think that's what confuses people sometimes. They feel like, oh, he's playing them so differently than I am. But again, they're still getting to the same break point. It's just personal how you get there.
Now let's take a long pattern. This 47 foot is quite long and it's very similar to the short. It's pretty well defined where you probably need to be starting playing the lanes.
Right, 47 feet, so we want your break point right around 16. And again, you want to be pretty direct with this distance.
So direct through the front part of the lane to this point, and as the lanes transition, you're probably going to be chasing it in. This one is probably, when you get the longer patterns, you're probably going to be chasing it in more than any other patterns.
Right, and you know, it's not like you're going to open the lane up very much. You're going to chase it left, but those angles aren't going to be very steep through the front.
We're still trying to play the same part of the lane down the lane. It's right down here at 16 board. You see this a lot on long patterns. Bowlers will immediately move to the right when they don't see the ball move on the back end, because there's so little back end there that your tendency to miss, you don't even come up and you leave hard spares to pick up. Your room for error is so slight when you make this move to the right. As you can see, the pattern distance really dictates where we want to play on the lane, whether it's a short, medium, or long. We want to kind of take that rule of 31 to give us a starting point where we want to play.
Right, I think so many times we start just exploring the lane and searching all over the place, and there's pretty defined areas to play once we know the important information as to the distance.
And you know, you're going to have different lane surfaces, so it doesn't mean that you have to play 8, but that's going to be the general zone that you want to be in. It might be 7, it might be 9, it might be 10. You have to be open, but you have a general idea of where you probably want to play, where you're going to have the most room for error.
Right.
We want to avoid thinking because the lanes are short or if they're long that it's oily or dry, because there's a distance or difference between distance and volume.
Right, I think people in the past, it used to kind of go hand in hand. If we saw a long pattern, it was almost always pretty high in volume, pretty oily. But nowadays, they're very, very separate. I think obviously the distance tells you, again, as we said, where to play on the lane, and the volume is going to tell you what ball to use and how much surface to use on that ball.
So if we have more volume or more oil in the lane, we want to use a more aggressive bowling ball, whether it's a short pattern or a long pattern.
Right.
The pattern distance tells us where we want to play, and the volume tells us how aggressive equipment we want to use.
Right.